against a variety of decks.
And we can't forget about the old Slaughter games as well. Not my favorite card, but definitely serves a role. As you see, the board here, both players with an Erebos in play. Jessup with a couple of lands, among them a Mutavault. Sin Collector on Braverman's side, he also has some lands, but it looks like he has an Underworld Connections where Jessup does not.
Yeah, and in these sort of mirror matches, not that this is exactly a mirror, but something resembling it, generally speaking, the person with the most card advantage wins. Having Erebos in play is also a pretty big edge as it shuts down Grey Merchant's life gain effect.
So we'll see what players are going to do here. It looks like that Jessup is a little bit behind the 8-ball, but he's going to try to work his way out of it. Has to be a little bit scared of the fact that the Erebos on the other side of the table can go live very, very soon, as this Grey Merchant is just going to be a drain. It's not going to gain any life for Jessup, but it will drain Braverman 3 points.
Yeah, and taking Erebos shots when you don't have the opportunity to gain life for the rest of the game is a huge cost.
Yeah. So Grey Merchant is deployed. The Erebos on Jessup's side is a little bit closer to Devotion. Braverman just drew an Underworld Connections, which can actually turn on the Erebos on his side of the board. But things are getting a little bit interesting. It's one of the few times we've actually tuned into a game where both players have an Erebos and threatening it.
Yeah, Michael this turn has the option of drawing a card, trying to find a land and deploying Blood Baron, and if he fails, simply playing an Underworld Connections, possibly a removal spell, or ignoring Underworld Connections for this turn and deploying his his Blood Baron. This gets him up to appropriate level of devotion for Erebos either way.
And both these players, top 8s on the Open Series, as here's a Blood Baron. That is actually going to turn on the Erebos. Again, the devotion count, 2 from the connections, 1 from the Baron, 1 from the Sin Collector, and 1 from Erebos itself. And now Erebos looks like it wants to come into the red zone, and it will. It's an attack here for 5 from Braverman.
Feels like a pretty big edge in the mirror matches having white in your deck, as Blood Baron is the most likely threat to go completely unchecked, and you also get access to Revoke Existence, which is particularly good when the post-board games often revolve around some mixture of Underworld Connections and Erebos.
You see another copy of Bioblight drawn here for Jessup. Bioblight pretty poor in this particular game state. Can't target the Blood Baron, not going to get Erebos off of the table. You see Jessup's going to use Erebos' ability, pay 2 to draw 1. It's a copy of Thoughtseize, which is also not great because he's a little bit too far behind right now for Thoughtseize to be a major player.
Yeah, and again, the Erebos on Michael's side of the table preventing Danny from gaining life from Grey Merchant or anything else. So whatever he's casting or using connections, Thoughtseizing, whatever, that life total is staying low, and he's already under the gun.
So there is a Swamp. This will be a Thoughtseize, and this could be more of an information Thoughtseize more than anything. I wouldn't be too surprised if Jessup is trying to get some info, maybe to see the way that Braverman sideboard or what he has access to. You see there is a Bioblight over there, and Underworld Connections and Thoughtseize, and 1 card off screen. But with Jessup so far behind, this could be an information Thoughtseize, and just kind of move forward as the card is a ultimate price.
Yeah, there's active Erebos, attacking Erebos, and an unchecked Blood Baron on Michael's side of the table. This game is getting to be pretty hopeless for Danny, but there's still value to be gleaned from actually seeing what's in his hand, seeing his sideboard, some weird maybe there's some strange one-of you should be aware of, what have you.
He will take Underworld Connections. That's going to go to the bin. And Jessup will pass the turn back with nothing much to do. Braverman will untap those lands. He'll take a draw step in a moment here, and we'll likely see him crash into the red zone with something.
Yeah. And if Danny doesn't have a black permanent to play this turn, a removal spell in Danny's hand can kill the Sin Collector and at least shut down Erebos from attacking this turn.
Yeah.
Long term, not much of a reprieve from what's happening, but at least gives him a little bit of breathing space this turn.
Looks like we're going to see a spell pre-combat here from Braverman. Even though he is ahead, he does want to make sure that he does sequence appropriately. So he's going to tap 2 Swamps. He's figuring out exactly what he wants to cast. Maybe fingering that ultimate price there to take care of the Grey Merchant.
Yeah, unlikely to get much better here, and Michael's just trying to clean up the game as fast as he can.
Yeah, and there is your ultimate price. So bye-bye Grey Merchant.
And I wonder if Michael's contemplating if there's a way to get an insurance black permanent into play so he can ensure that his Erebos is attacking.
Yeah. Has to assume there's probably a removal spell out there for the Sin Collector. But it doesn't look like he does, as Underworld Connections was taken by Jessup last turn. So creature's going to come into the red zone here. Erebos also itching to come sideways. So there are your attacks. Blood Baron, Erebos, and a Sin Collector. An attack here for 11 with Jessup at 9. There is your Bioblight. Take care of the Sin Collector. less devotion out there for the Erebos, so they'll actually get removed from combat. But that Blood Baron's still an issue.
Oh yeah, I mean, how many Mizium Mortars does Danny have access to here?
Taking a
if
look
any at all.
in the main deck, I don't see any, and in the sideboard, I don't see any.
Okay.
So the answer would be 0.
All right, 0.
That's the number you're looking for.
That's a rough number to have right now.
See Braverman considering a few options here in his second main phase after damage was dealt and life was gained.
He seems to be very cautious about using any of his card drawing effects right now.
Yeah, I think he's just kind of interested to see exactly what's the ways that I can lose this game, and it doesn't seem to be many, as Jessup does draw a Swamp for the turn to go along with that Bile Blight.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine it starting anywhere other than with Mizium Mortars.
Yeah.
That's got to be the start, as it may keep Erebos off of Devotion and deals with the Blood Baron, which is the biggest short-term problem.
I'm a little surprised to see no copies of Mizium Mortars here. Jessup is going to go down to 3 and draw a card. Does draw a Gray Merchant, which in a lot of cases would be a pretty good draw, but it can't gain any life with Erebos on the other side of the table. So that'll be an issue.
Yeah, Danny just trying to figure out if he needs to keep drawing here. Possibly needs to block with Mutavault this turn.
Connection's going to draw a card here from Braverman. He's going to go down to 12. And there you do see the God of the Dead. Your opponents cannot gain life, so the effect is not symmetrical, except for when both players have one.
Yeah.
That is very symmetrical.
We'll see here if Michael is able to reassemble Devotion for Erebos. Really the last piece of the puzzle to solidify this game.
Pay a life, draw a card. Looks like a Temple comes rolling at the top. Maybe a Dark Betrayal.
And Michael also has the option here of simply firing up Mutavault and saying, all right, let's see what's going on here.
Pretty much. I think he's going to clear the coast here with a Thoughtseize. There's a Bile Blighted Gray Merchant and a Swamp. Braverman's going to take 2 more, get on to 9, but now he sees that the coast is clear. He can take the Bile Blight, fire up the Mutavault, and just get the job done, essentially. Jessup can do some chump blocking with Mutavault on his own, but if those are going under the bus, things are really, really good for Braverman. So he is going to take Bile Blight. Again, does not have to worry about Gray Merchant too much, simply because it cannot gain life in this situation. This is a godless shrine. Braverman's going to go down even further. Just going to attack with the Blood Baron. An attempt to block.
Yeah, it looks like Michael has 2 removal spells in hand to kill the 2 blocking Mutavaults, and Blood Baron gets it done.
He'll show a Bile Blight and a Hero's Downfall, and we're going to move on to game number 3 here between Michael Braverman and Danny Jessup. Black-Red Devotion versus a Black-White Mid-Range.
Pretty compelling to see the various black-based builds now add colors. A lot of that's being facilitated by more temples getting printed in. So the black-red build wasn't really feasible before, but definitely the different colors offer a variety of incentives, and staying mono black also has its incentives as well.
There's also probably a black-green version coming on the horizon here.
Oh, sure. I mean, even before Born of the Gods came out, we saw mono black devotion decks that were touching green for Abrupt Decay, maybe Golgari Charm in the sideboard back when the mirror match was all about Pack Rat and Underworld connections.
Yeah. Having
additional answers to those cards was pretty valuable, and the mana ended up just being too bad. I mean, people were having to play, you know, various cycling artifacts, Pentaprism type of cards to find their mana, and so that wasn't really worth the cost. But once the Green-Black Temple comes out, you might see that change.
Wouldn't be too surprised, as we are going to watch these players sideboard, and we'll take a look at their sideboards actually here. Since Jessup will be on the play, I'll take a look at his 3 Duresses, 3 Doomblades, 2 Pharika Cures, 2 Slaughter Games, a Whip of Erebos, a Sire of Insanity, an Erebos God of the Dead, a Rakdos' Return, and 1 Nightfell Spectre to go along with his 2 in his main deck. Of course, I expect the Spectre to come in along with the additional discard and 3 Duresses. Doomblades will stay on the bench, as will Pharika Cure. I don't think you really want Slaughter Games in this matchup, as there are a bevy of cards to name, and even if you select 1 out of their deck, another one can kill you and get the job done. Whip of Erebos is certainly okay, and we already saw Erebos God of the Dead in. The big questions I have here are Sire of Insanity and Rakdos' Return, and if it's realistic to cast either of those cards when you've got discard spells flying back and forth.
Well, I think Sire of Sanity is pretty unrealistic. I do think that Rakdos' Return is potentially quite powerful here, as both players get to positions where they're attacking each other's hands and taking out the high-impact cards. Often the first person to find a high-impact card first is going to be the one who's favored. Additionally, often both players are just sitting with removal spells in their hand because neither player has enough threats to deploy into the face of the discard. So Danny can actually play a game where, you know, he can Thoughtseize away Michael's proactive cards, whether it be card drawing spells or threats, allow him to rot with removal spells in the hand, and eventually Rakdos return to clean it all up. Of course, that risks duresses and Thoughtseizes on the other side, but it is an avenue that Danny has access to that Michael does not.
For Mr. Braverman?
3 Sin Collector, 3 Duress, 2 Lightbane Zombies, a Revoke Existence, 3 Blood Barons, 2 Doom Blades, and an Erebos God of the Dead. The Erebos, the 3 Blood Barons, the Revoke Existence, the 3 Duresses, and the 3 Sin Collectors all seem very well suited for this matchup. Michael feels like he has the much more impactful sideboard, as he has a lot of discard and some real haymakers in Blood Baron that, as we saw in that second game, Danny does not have a ton of answers to.
Well, Game 3 will be underway for you guys at home in just a moment, but if you are just joining us, we do appreciate it. Cedric Hills, Patrick Sullivan, and Osa Bebedovich, along with Andrew Shrout and Nick Miller, and the rest of the SCG Live crew, bringing you our first Invitational of the year, culminating Season 1 here in Charlotte, North Carolina. At SCG Live, hashtag SCGINVI for your tweets all weekend long, as we do have a handful of rounds left here, and then we'll turn our attention to our Standard Open, which has 577 players to start off Season 2.
Yeah, our introductory event for Season 2, and it's interesting to see what kind of adaptations people are making to their standard decks now with the information from the Invitational.
Yep.
There's a lot of cool new stuff. Have players, you know, they were paying attention to the event, and with card availability could be playing entirely different decks today than maybe they were planning on playing yesterday.
Yeah. Braverman is going to send it back. Jessup looks happy here, and as these players do prepare for game number 3, talking with Joe Lissette, before our standard portion started. Undefeated with miracles this weekend. Surprise, surprise. Or no, maybe not.
Was it 5-0-3? Or was it
no draws? Actual
wow.
No draws this weekend for Joe. Undefeated with miracles, playing Boros Burn in the standard portion. He's currently 10-2 coming into this particular round. And I was, just kind of asked him, how do you feel about going to the standard portion? He's just like, I don't know, man. I don't think it's going to work out very well. And for him, he essentially needs to just go 2-1 through the first 3 rounds, and he'd be able to draw in, and he wasn't feeling too confident about that. So I'm really interested to see exactly how things are going to go for him for the next 3 rounds. If he's able to pick up a win in this round, he's got to be feeling pretty good about his top 8 chances. It
really speaks to the quality of the players in this event that a player as good as Joe, not particularly experienced with standard, but a very good Magic player, feels that he's not favored to go 2-1 over 3 rounds. Yeah. Because the quality of play is so high and these players are so experienced that, if this was maybe a PTQ or day 1 of a Grand Prix, he would feel, I'm not that experienced with standard, but I'm so much better at Magic than most of my opponents that I'll pick up an edge that way. Joe not with the same confidence here. As we get to the later rounds of the Invitational, all your opponents are going to be good.
I will tell you this. Legacy top 8, untimed rounds, best of 5. Joe the set with miracles. No, thank you.
Yeah,
I don't want any part of that.
No chance.
Yeah. He's going to find the right play and decimate you as we are underway. Swamp Thoughtseize. First time I've ever seen this before.
A controversial opening here from Danny. Willing to pay 2 life. Very interesting.
You see a Hero's Downfall, Sin Collector, Desecration Demon, and a Blood Baron with Scopa, along with a Godless Shrine and a Swamp.
I would imagine this is going to be between Sin Collector and Blood Baron.
Yeah, that Hero's Downfall, he can work his way around since he knows about it, but he is staring at a Nightveil Spectre in his hand right now, so he may have some serious interest in just getting rid of the Hero's Downfall,
okay,
and he does.
All right, so he has a path that he wants to carve out here.
Braverman with a lot of draw steps here to take care of the Nightveil Spectre between removal spells and discard, so we'll see if he does find one, as Jessup's going to write down these cards, make sure he knows exactly what Braverman does have. First draw step. That'll yield another Godless Shrine. First one's going to come into play tap. Braverman will pass it back. Jessup draws a copy of Rakdos' Return. Weren't sure if he was going to leave the 2 that he has in or sideboard in the 3rd one, but we know he has at least 1.
And Rakdos' Return, a really good argument for trying to strand Michael with removal spells or expensive stuff in hand, as Rakdos' Return can then clean that all up.
Jessup did not find a 3rd untapped land. He finds a copy of Temple of Malice, so Nightveil Spectre will not be untimed. Top card is left on top, as he does pass the turn back over to Braverman, who draws a copy of Underworld Connections.
All right, so Michael's starting to rebuild a little bit here. He's found the land drops for the Desecration Demon and especially the Blood Baron that he wants to cast, and an Underworld Connections to start recouping some of the card advantage that he lost to that mulligan.
The big question is, does he want to cast Underworld Connections or Sin Collector? And he wants to play the 2-1. So take a look at the grip of 2 Devour Flesh. a Gray Merchant of Asphodel, a Night Veil Spectre, and that Rakdos' Return we mentioned.
This hand that Danny has is really susceptible to missing land drops. He has a couple edicts in his hand, but Michael's going to be able to develop a cushion for those through his Sin Collector and his Desecration Demon. And the Rakdos Return and Gray Merchant, of course, aren't very powerful for Danny unless he draws more mana. If Michael doesn't have a way to kill this Night Veil Spectre, then Danny has multiple draw steps in effect to find the mana he's looking for.
Yeah.
But for as good of a start as Danny looked like he had here and how much trouble Michael was in, the game feels like it's shifted.
Yeah, Night Veil Spectre is kind of problem number one here for Braverman. He's trying to figure out what card to take too. Some pretty compelling options between Devour Flesh and Rakdos' Return. They're both very different cards, but they both play a huge role in the game, and Devour Flesh is going to bite the dust here.
Yeah, I like taking the Devour Flesh here, as all Michael is really trying to do is open up a window for Blood Baron to go unchecked. That one Devour Flesh is already somewhat committed to the Sin Collector in play. The Desecration Demon requires another response, and wearing down Danny's defenses might open up a path for Blood Baron to enter play and be relatively unchecked.
So, in a moment here, Braverman will pass it back. Wants to make sure he has the contents of the hand. And I think Jessup is deciding if he wants to cast Devour Flesh or not, and he does. So Sin Collector is going to get off of the table. Braverman will gain a little bit of life. Jessup will untap very quickly. We know he kept his top card on top. Unsurprisingly, it's a land. It's a Rakdos Guildgate. That's going to come into play tapped. Spectre's on the table, and we'll pass it back to Braverman for his fourth turn.
I think if Michael is able to find a removal spell this turn, he's got a really good shot at winning this game.
But he did not. His draw was a swamp. He has a Desecration Demon. We know he has connections. You know that he has Blood Baron of Escopa. So 4 mana, Deso Demon in the house. Now it's Jessup who needs the removal spell. What does he draw?
His Lifebane Zombie, that is right in the nick of time.
Yes, it is. So Lifebane Zombie shows up to the party. Says, I need this Blood Baron. Thank you much. Now I just have to contend with this 6/6 and Underworld Connections, providing a mystery card.
And this is the way the Black X mirror matches often play out. Both players very aggressive, attacking each other's hands. And then it's who's ever able to stick a source of card advantage, whether it be Erebos or Underworld Connections, or sneak through some threat that's hard to check. Most likely Blood Baron is going to be a huge edge.
Also, Jessup doing a pretty nice job of setting up a nice Rakdos Return, and the Gray Merchant. Devotion count is pretty high. I think Jessup is considering his options of, do I sacrifice this Lifebane Zombie to try to hit you and get a card? Your thoughts on that?
I think it's a little early for that line. And also the Lifebane Zombie has a lot of value. It's just another piece of devotion for the Gray Merchant that's in Danny's hand as well. So probably best, I understand, you know, there's some really big hits that he could potentially get off the Night Veil Spectre, but I feel like he's better served pumping the brakes for a little bit. And if you know that Michael is going to be basically playing Underworld Connections as his turn, the upside of you drawing a removal spell for the Desecration Demon being able to hit with both of your creatures is huge.
Braverman draws his card for the turn. See what he wants to do. You see 3 mana going to be tapped. Looks like Connections will be his turn. On to that untapped Swamp. Going to play a Swamp. Jessup knows about the last card in grip, so he'll just pass the turn back. Swamp off the top here for Danny.
And I like that play from Michael, not using the connections right away, even though there's Thoughtseize potentially duress and such that he can draw. Because he knows Danny has Rakdos Return, he doesn't want to draw something and have it get stranded in hand and then dumped out by the return.
And that's a Gray Merchant. A little drain and gain for 7. 3 from the Spectre, 2 from the Lifebane, 2 from the Merchant itself. So Jessup's going to gain 7. Braverman's going to lose 7 life, and maybe we'll see one of these creatures sacrificed so we can get some damage through.
I think there's an argument to be made for sacking Gray Merchant right now, getting him for 5. Remember, he's got Rakdos Return in hand, so that's another burn spell. Taxing his life total here is excellent in the face of the Underworld Connections. You need to start wearing that down so he can't draw cards at his leisure for the entire game. And you get to hit with the Night Veil Spectre, which has some upside as well.
Orzhov Guildgate comes rolling off the top. Not the most exciting card, but it's a card nonetheless, as Jessup will pass the turn back, and Braverman's going to draw.
There's 2 things really nice about the Orzhov Guildgate here. One is he gets to make a land drop next turn, which is valuable for the Rakdos Return in hand. Number 2, it turns on some really big draws down the line for that Night Veil Spectre, including Blood Baron off of Michael's deck.
Braverman draws his card at 8 life right now. You see a Blood Baron of Vescopa was the draw. That is a very big one. Yeah,
Blood Baron with Edict protection in play with the Desecration Demon.
Yeah. Looks like there's also an Obsidian over there in Braverman's hand that he can cast if he'd like. So some really, really nice options here for the black-white mid-range player. The big question is, which one do you cast? He also has a Bile Blight, which could be a removal spell for that Nightveil Spectre. And Spectre has proven to be a bit of an issue, but he also has to know, does Braverman, that whichever card he chooses to cast, the other ones are gonna leave.
Yep.
Because of the Rakdos' return.
Well, he needs to cast something. He can't use a removal spell really this turn because he's, you know, he knows about Lifebane Zombie, Thoughtseize in Danny's deck.
Bloodbaron's going to come into play. Braverman's going to pass the turn back. 2 cards in hand. Bile Blight and an Obsidian. Nightveil Spectre here for Jessup. Maybe some interest in deploying the Flyer again.
And quite frankly, I think Danny might be in a spot now where he needs to pin down this Desecration Demon and hit with Nightveil Spectre.
Try to find something.
Yeah, as bad as it looks, you know, where else is this going? The game's going to swing around pretty quickly here once Michael starts to connect with that Blood Baron.
And you see him kind of shaking his head saying, man, I just needed to fade 1 Blood Baron. I think I would have been good to go. And now he's got some work to do, even though he was in the driver's seat about a turn and a half ago.
Yeah, the Blood Baron in this sort of matchup is just dwarfs the impact of all the other sideboard cards you can have, really. And Danny was relatively prepared. I mean, he kept a hand with 2 copies of Devour Flesh.
Yes.
Sin Collector ate up both of them, and now we're here.
So Orzhov Guildgate will be the land that's played. Will he play Nightveil Spectre? He's going to play the Spectre. So that means Braverman's going to have the opportunity to either A, cast an Obsidian, or B, Bile Blight, both of those. And, you know, the mono black, black-red devotion, black-white mid-range, however you want to classify these decks, I kind of put them just as black devotion decks. These matchups, these mirrors, they're very, very swingy.
Yeah, right now, I think priority 1 is getting those Nightveil Spectres off the table.
Yeah, and that's a Bile Blight to clear both those up. And Braverman's draw was a Sin Collector, so my goodness, this game is changing.
Yeah, that Sin Collector is actually perfect. If there was any debate before about whether or not he wanted to play Obsidian or Bile Blight, finding a Sin Collector that turn to take care of the Rakdos return in Danny's hand makes it an easy decision.
In comes the Baron and the 7/7 Demon. That's going to be 11 damage for Jessup. He's going to go down to 14. Braverman's going to gain 4. He's going to go up to 12. So he's stabilizing at a pretty nice life total. There's the Sin Collector. There goes the Rakdos' return. And now it's Danny Jessup that has no cards in his hand and playing at the top of his deck.
Yeah, and now Devour Flesh just doesn't even matter.
Yep. And now you see Jessup with his hands on his head saying, what the heck went wrong here?
Yep. Keep in mind, Michael mulliganed this game too.
Yeah.
It may not look like it now, but...
Yeah, and there's a Gray Merchant, which could have been a huge draw a turn ago.
Yep.
Now it doesn't really matter at all. It's going to be a gain and a drain of 4. Braverman's going to go back down to 8, and Jessup's going to gain 4 life and go up to 18. But again, this game has just shifted drastically. And these are the kind of swings where, yes, both players' hands are going to be absolutely destroyed via discard, but you can't stop the top of the deck.
Yeah, and the last 2 turns, if you had to ask Danny, what's the worst thing that could happen to me this turn? Michael's had it both times. First time Blood Baron, and last turn Bile Blight plus Sin Collector.
Yep. If Braverman could draw up cards to find, those would have been them. Now he's put the Desecration Demon trigger on the stack. No sacrifice here from Jessup. So looks like another attack here for 11 is the choice. Jessup's going to go down to 7. Braverman up to 12. We know he has knows that as a follow-up. There's a Swamp. He even gets to leave Underworld Connections up. Jessup, all he can do is kind of shrug his shoulders and say, all right, man, you're going to win. There's nothing I can do.
You're going to Desolation Angel me next turn, blow up all my lands? What's going on here?
Obsidian's going to go hiding. Underworld Connections available. Jessup is going to untap. And unfortunately for him, I think this is going to be probably his last draw step of the game as Bile Blight is the draw. He's going to give the Orzhov Guildgate back and concede the game. Michael Braverman is going to win this match over Danny Jessup. And you see Jessup players' eyebrows. Sometimes there's nothing you can do. Black-white mid-range defeats Black-red devotion 2 games to 1, and Braverman's top 8 dreams are still alive.